Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome listeners to a very special day. We're outside, it's the 18th of August and we're here at the Mothers Memorial to celebrate Vietnam Veterans Day. I've got a very special guest with me to start with. His name is Reverend David Snape and we've just finished the service. So David, welcome along to Big Little Small Talk and thank you for making time for me today.
Thank you.
David, can you tell me your experience or your contact with Vietnam veterans or how you get to be the padre who does the service here today?
Oh, yes. I was lucky enough, lucky enough not to actually be called up for the national service. My birth date wasn't taken out, even though I was 18 at that stage. And my involvement with military has been for the past 20-odd years. I was also an army chaplain. So both here at Kabbalah with 7C, then I did 12 months up in Darwin with 1 Armoured, which is the tank regiment. Then I did another two years in Townsville, 5 Aviation. Then was transferred down to Brisbane, down to Toowoomba, to Oki at the Army Aviation Training Centre, and which I was there for nearly 13 years, on and off. So my involvement with Sydney Reserve and Vietnam veterans has been extensive since I've been back here in Toowoomba, which is my hometown.
Right, you grew up in Toowoomba. Oh, that's interesting, yeah. Tell me about this service and what it means to people, and exactly what are we commemorating here today?
Well, it used to be called the Long Tan Day, which was the day when the Australian forces were trapped with a brigade of North Vietnamese, and they fought so well that D Company of 6 RAR were there, and they held off nearly a battalion of the enemy. And that's what we're celebrating here, not the actual warfare, but those who survived, and we remember those who actually died in that conflict.
Tell me about the evolution of the way people feel about Vietnam and the conflict that happened there.
It was difficult when they came back home, as we all know. They didn't get the support I believe they needed. They used to arrive at night time and be demobbed the same night and then flown home to their various places where they came from with no acceptance of what they did. That didn't happen, I have the details here, until the 1980s when the actual coming home parade took place. Yeah, 1987 it was. And 22,000 Vietnam veterans marched through Sydney in front of a crowd of some 100,000 Australians, which is tremendous. But that should have happened years before.
Yes, for sure. Now, you spoke very beautifully before during the service, and you did a couple of prayers, and I particularly wanted you to read them out for me today. Yeah, Would you mind doing that?
No, that'll be fine. So the first one was the prayer that I start with. It goes like this: Lord God, as the sun shines this day, help us to remember the sacrifice of all in the Defence Force, and especially the members of the Vietnam, and generations of men, women and children who died in the cause and liberty of peace. Help us to remember those who still bear the physical and mental scars and disabilities of their service. Help us to remember the widows and widowers, girlfriends and boyfriends, parents and orphans, sisters and brothers, and all who have waited in vain the return of a loved one. Help us to remember the mateship, agony, courage, and compassion of war service, but save us from ever glorifying the horror and tragedy of war. As the sun shines on this day, Lord, help us to remember. Amen.
Could you read the prayer for peace, which is what you finished, which I thought was particularly moving and beautiful?
Okie dokie. Almighty God, from whom all thoughts of truth and peace proceed, kindle, we pray, the hearts of all who true love of peace, and guide with your pure and peaceful wisdom those who take counsel for the nations of the earth, that in tranquility your kingdom may go forward, till the earth is filled with the knowledge of your love, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Well, Reverend Snape, that's beautiful, and I really appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me today and taking me through what Vietnam Veterans Service Remembrance Day means to you, and I'll go and catch up with a couple of the other people before they run off, but thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure, and thank you for asking.
Okay, listeners, we've changed guest now. I've got another very special guest, and he was the fellow who made the speech here today. His name's Jim Danskin. Jim, welcome along to Big Little Small Talk, and tell me what's been happening here today.
We're celebrating the anniversary of the Battle of Long Tam, which is now known as Vietnam Veterans Day. We gather here every year on the 18th of August for a small but very moving ceremony to honour those that didn't make it home from Vietnam and those who've died since because of injuries and psychological effects of the war.
Were you a serving member in Vietnam?
I did. I served in 1969 to 1970.
What's your lasting memories of that time of your life?
One of the things that did really stick with me was the smell of the task force after they sprayed it for the mosquitoes, and it was something that just got up your nose, in your clothes, and really stayed with you. The other thing, I guess, was the work we did, which was signals intelligence, providing information to the task force to plan operations. Not talked about a lot because of the obsession with secrecy, but quite a lot of the battles that went on after Long Tam were organised as a result of signals intelligence and direction finding locations.
And as we're sitting here, a few motorbikes are roaring away there. Do you know some of those guys and what's the significance of motorbikes in Vietnam veterans?
I don't think any of them were Vietnam motorbike riders, but they belonged to the veterans motorbikes, and I met them briefly earlier today.
Now, as I mentioned before, you made the speech today, and it was a really lovely, moving speech. And if I can, I'm going to get you to read it out. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 4DDB, and they're with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're in our segment called Big Little Small Talk. And today we're out at the Vietnam Veterans Service, out at the Mothers Memorial. It's a beautiful winter's day, the 18th of the 8th. So, Jim, if you could read your speech for me.
When the Australian government committed troops to the war in Vietnam, I believe that most members of the services would have realised this would be a different and particularly nasty deployment. After all, this potential enemy had been fighting various enemies for years, long struggles against different enemies, concluding with the French. Australian troops had mastered the art of jungle warfare in Malaya, Borneo and New Guinea during World War II, and later during confrontation with Indonesia in Borneo, when our troops from the Commonwealth Brigade acquitted themselves with honour. Vietnam was to be, however, vastly different. It would be a war of helicopter insertions and extractions to engage a very elusive enemy. In the Malayan emergency and the Borneo during confrontation, the chopper activity was provided by the British forces, and it was now time for the RAAF to master the technique of insertion and extraction, sometimes rather rapid extractions. And master it they did. I do not doubt that our grateful troops would be happy to acknowledge that fact. They also had the task of resupply, another skill mastered by the air and ground crews of the RAF, and all credit to them. Members of the Navy, the crews at sea on the gun line, on the Vung Tau ferry run, the unsung heroes of the clearance diving teams, and all the other sailors adding to the credibility of our fighting forces. The fabulous medical teams, from the medic deployed operationally, those life-saving, incredible medevac teams, the many doctors and nursing staff, some of them civilians, in the regimental aid posts and hospitals in Nui Dat, Vung Tau and RAF Butterworth, quite often performing life-saving surgery under very demanding conditions. So many people on our casualty list would not be with us in today's society if not for these often unsung heroes. And who could ever forget the entertainers, their careers on hold to entertain us? I think that just about all of us are a little bit in love with the First Lady of Nui Dat, Lorraine Desmond. Another factor which would have an effect on the war in South Vietnam, and particularly on our soldiers in the forefront of the action, would be the introduction of signals intelligence known as SIGINT to the planning staff at Task Force headquarters, the first time it had been available directly to deployed Australian troops. During World War II, a unit known as the Australian Special Wireless Group supplied signals intelligence to headquarters from where it was utilised. They were active in every theatre of World War II, Europe, Middle East, the desert campaigns, and in New Guinea. In New Guinea, they were responsible for the interception of a message that listed the travel plan and route of an aeroplane ferrying Admiral Yamamoto, a Japanese commander in the Pacific, and one of the architects of the planning for an eventual invasion of mainland Australia. The plane was shot down with the loss of all on board, severely denting the planning for the invasion and disrupting Japanese activity. SIGINT was used widely in Borneo during confrontation, and the British headquarters relied heavily on the intelligence provided by both Australian and British signals for the planning of cross-border operations. It was expected to be available, as they had for many years employed this technique in Germany during the Cold War. However, in South Vietnam it was all new and initially not thought to be reliable enough to use in planning operations. This was mainly due to Defence's obsession with secrecy, and the majority of the planners, the intelligence staff and the battalion commanding officers had not been exposed to signals intelligence. Leading up to Long Tan, one of the reasons we gather here today, when the Troop OC tried to inform Task Force headquarters that there were more than just a few ZC in the rubber, he was told there was no evidence that North Vietnamese army were active in the province. When the troop intercepted a message from the senior NVA regimental commander, which he sent to his headquarters in the north, that all was ready for the attack on the Task Force base, and then a mortar attack leading up to the 18th of August 1966, and the fragments shown to be organic to the North Vietnamese army, he still could not convince them. He's reported to have sent a signal to Canberra saying, "Why the hell are we bothering?" We are all aware of what took place in what we now call the Battle of Long Tan, and if not for the bravery, the tenacity, the courage and the sheer guts of our diggers, what we honour as we should could have been a disaster. After Long Tan, the rumours were spread about what should have been known to our troops, and eventually Defence had to ever so slightly ease their obsession with secrecy and read more personnel into the world of SIGINT, including the battalion commanding officers. As well as intelligence gathered from radio intercepts, we had a very efficient airborne direction finding unit to fix the location of transmitters. Developed in Australia by scientists at the Weapons Research Establishment in South Australia, instead of needing 2 or more base stations on the ground to triangulate a location, the ARDF could, by flying in a straight line, take a series of readings and could provide a location of a transmitter. 161 Recce Flight were our host aircraft, and I wish to acknowledge their professionalism and dedication to our efforts. Once the planning staff accepted that this new weapon actually worked, most planning for operations began with an updated brief on fixed locations of enemy forces. We often receive requests for assistance from the US Command. On many occasions, some a quick in and out job which enabled US Special Force members to pay a visit to the location, and some which required more elaborate detailed planning. I'd like to conclude today with a story about the start of one of the more elaborate requests. Finishing our flying for the day, as we taxied along the Luscombe Strip, the pilot remarked, "You have an officer for your driver today, Baron," and our operations officer waiting near the revetment area. Unloading my gear, I asked, "Slow day in the office today, sir, or did you just fancy a drive in the country?" He answered that an American 2-star general was waiting to meet me, that he was famous for a total lack of humour, so please, no smart-ass comments. "Me, sir? I'm hurt you would think so badly of me." Arriving at our compound, there is indeed a 2-star, all his staff, the task force commander and our troop OC. I am introduced and the general says, "Well, Baron, how would you like to spend $250,000 of Uncle Sam's dollars?" Completely forgetting the warning given to me, I said, "Well, sir, if you can get me on an R&R flight to Hong Kong, and if they have enough Jack Daniels, I'll give it my best shot." Total disbelief and horrified looks all around the gathering, and I swear the task force brigadier undid the holster with the thought of shooting me there and then. I'm thinking I've made a major oopsie. I'm preparing to apologise when from the general there was something never heard before. A gut-breaking laugh, so of course then everyone laughed. When he got his breath, he said, "I'll go with you and there'll definitely not be enough Jack in the colony." Thank you all for attending, for the honour of addressing the gathering on this very important day on the veteran calendar, and I earnestly pray that we never forget the past, the present and future members of the Defence Forces.
Beautifully done, beautifully written, and with such humour and humility. So Jim, you haven't told me about the Baron. Tell me, where does the Baron come from? What's all that about?
Well, the American art of planes called themselves the Snoopies, and our radio sergeant was a very keen fan of the Peanuts column strip. So he had one of his diggers who was a good cartoonist, drew 3 panels of cartoons. One showed a spick and span American airplane loaded with machine guns and antennas and medals and citations. And the next one was a broken down old World War I biplane held together with band-aids and sticking plaster with a red kangaroo on the tail to assure everyone knew it was an Australian airplane. And the third one showed me walking out towards the plane carrying all my radio gear, my rifle and my flying helmet, and him standing in the doorway with a cup of coffee in one hand, a cigar in the other hand, saying, "Farewell, Red Baron, take it to those Snoopies."
All right. Thank you, Jim, forever known now as Baron. Further to our interview, listeners, after that lovely speech by Jim, I've got the most wonderful pair of sisters here, Genny and Kathy, and we've just been talking about being here at the Battle of Long Tan. They are ladies who are from the Harlaxton Women's Auxiliary, and first I'm going to go to Kathy and find out her experience with, I guess, the veterans, and tell me what the auxiliary does, Kathy.
Yeah, well, we have a meeting and a Hawaii party every second Monday of the month up at North Toowoomba, and we do get, residents from different places, but at the moment we're, with all the lockdowns, we haven't had so many, and we used to always have a veterans lunch once a year up there, and we'd ask all the retirement places to come to our veterans lunch, and we used to get about 100 people, and so we work pretty hard there, all our committee and that. Grace Kasoo is my secretary of the Women's Auxiliary.
How did the Women's Auxiliary come into existence? What's its main purpose?
Been at Harlaxton. It was ongoing from 1957, and then they had a venue there in Ruffin Street, the sub-branch, and something happened to it. When I was younger, I used to help the ladies out with weddings and parties and Christmas parties and all sorts of things. And they raised a lot of money, and that's how they had that venue there. And we did everything by hand, washing up and all that sort of stuff, and that's how they raised their money. But those ladies, Mary Leach is the one that got Genny and I back into the auxiliary, because when I retired, she rang me up and said, "Seen you got nothing to do." I didn't know whether I wanted to. But anyway, I got very involved in it. But Mary Leach, she was an honourable lady. She'd done a lot of work for the Harlaxton branch, and she kept the auxiliary going. And that's how she got a lot of different ones in there. And see, my mother, many years ago, she was a president of the Halidon RSL, because that was in this area, and my stepfather was the president too, and she was involved in this Harlaxton one too, and they were involved in that one down there, and we were involved too. We used to, Mum would drag us all along, to volunteer, of course. But now the auxiliary, it's very small. We've only got, I don't know how many members we got now, because just trying to think, there's only about 5 or 6 of us that work, that run them,
So are the Women's Auxiliary, is it generally women who have been partners of people who have been in the defence in some way?
It was. All the partners were the ones that did the auxiliary, but it doesn't seem to be that way anymore, because my husband wasn't in the services, but I have a great... my grandfather was in the First and Second World War, and he got a medal from the King. Yes, I've got all them at home. That's on my father's side. And my mother, well, she got involved with my stepfather when they retired from the farm, and my stepfather had his leg amputated, and that's how they got involved. And they used to raise money for I forget what they call that girl. You know, she used to go down and represent the RSL and everything, but they don't do that anymore. No. But we do raise a fair bit of money.
Was your stepfather's injury, was that from a war injury?
Well, he said it was, but of course he didn't get anything. He only wanted money for the medical things, and because, you know, they were pretty hard those days, so he didn't. But my mother had two brothers that had the TPI pension, and what's his name, Anderson, they used to work at the Western Transport, and they were in the Second World War too, in the 55 battalion, wasn't it? Yeah, 55, yeah, and so they were in a bit of a bad state. They were in a mess.
Kathy, what is your official title at the Harlaxton Women Auxiliary?
I'm the president.
Mm-hmm. And is this person sitting next to me, she is not only your sister, she is?
She's one of our members, and she does a lot of work there too.
So you're the older sister, I take it?
Yes.
How old are you, Kathy, if you don't mind me asking and don't think me impertinent?
No, 78.
Okay, I'm going to talk to the younger sister over here, Genny, to my right. Jenny's the one who knows how to use the mobile phone. So that I take it you share a mobile phone between you, do you?
I had one, but I'd done away with it. Oh.
All right, Genny. Now, well, it's lovely to speak to you. You being the younger sister, you've been roped into the Harlaxton Women's Auxiliary as well, I take it?
I have, yes.
Tell me your sort of history. How did you've retired now?
I am.
With nothing to do like Kathy?
Yeah, I'm retired. I've been retired for about 8 or 9 years. I'm not quite sure, but in around about that.
What type of work were you doing?
Up at St Vincent, and then I also worked at the Gatton College for about 25 years. Yeah.
What kind of capacity were you working, Genny?
Well, at the college I was a waitress there. We looked after the students and any special dinners and things like that came in.
And do you remember being involved in the Helidon Women's Auxiliary that Kathy was talking about with your mum? How did you feel about that as a kid?
I did. I helped Mum. She said she just wanted us to go along because they had their helpers down there, but she always wanted us to give her a hand as well. Yeah.
And how much is the Harlaxton Women's Auxiliary taking up your life at the moment, or has been probably prior to COVID?
At the moment, it's just we have the meeting and the hoi on every second Monday, and when we finally get back to normal again, I would say, then I suppose we'll have our veterans dinner and the other dinner that we do for the veterans.
Kathy's forgotten something. What was the other function that you do?
We have a Melbourne Cup party at the Wilsonton Hotel, and we raise a lot of money there.
You're all big betters, I would imagine.
Well, we have a few of our sponsors donate prizes, so, and then the hotel donates such stuff too, you know, lots of things. And then we have the on Anzac Day, my daughter we raised money on Anzac Day, just with meat trays that the hotel donated. Genny and I did it, and she was more pushier than me. And we raised $500, so we were pretty happy about that.
Good for you. Down the pub with the meat tray. Oh, I mean, my goodness, what dedication. It's unbelievable. Genny, we were talking about your working history. Did you have an involvement with the military apart from Kathy's obviously shared history?
No. I've never been in the military or anything like that, no.
This this service here today, the Vietnam Veterans one, you lived through that era, obviously.
Right.
What's your lasting memories of that time?
It was, I suppose you could say it was a terrible year, 10 years with that, because they really did a lot of wrong for those servicemen and women that were over there. And I had a friend that was over there as well. And, you know, they just didn't even try to understand what they were doing over there. The government sent them, and they were doing what the government asked them to do. So I just can't understand why they had to take it out on those soldiers.
It was the time, wasn't it? And those people came back with such terrible mental health issues as a consequence of that. So your friend who served over there, do you still have contact with that person?
No, I don't. No, he's been remarried now, so he's right. But no, we were very close, but no, I haven't seen him for years.
Yeah. And what other schemes does Kathy come up with besides going to the Harlaxton Women's Auxiliary? What other things do you enjoy doing together, the pair of you?
Oh, we do the veterans lunch, and then there's anything else.
Merchandise, you're going to sell it to them. And we sell merchandise for the Harlaxton sub-branch, and Genny's going up there today.
What sort of merchandise is it?
Well, it's long-term, probably Vietnam stuff. But Mike Gowdy was saying they didn't get enough because the people up there are marvellous, because the Harlaxton sub-branch does a lot of work in the community and at that Harlaxton school. And what else? And yes, so they do very well up there with the merchandise.
I notice you're wearing a very jaunty red, white and blue RSL branded scarf today. Is that part of the merchandising?
Yes, yeah.
Along with your red leather jacket?
No, it's not it.
I take it the red leather jacket is not part of the merchandising.
No,
that's right.
No, I've probably got something on me here. I have a poppy, and then I've got a lot of stuff at home. Oh, Genny has. She's got those earrings that Mike Gowdy's...
Describe your earrings to the listeners, Genny.
The last time we were doing it up there for the First World War, this one, and they for the poppies, and this is how I come with these.
So how were they made?
How were they?
Mike Gowdy's.
Hang on, we'll get pass back over to Kathy. Kathy knows how the earrings were made.
Well, Mike Gowdy's son's partner, she makes those earrings, and Mike said they have to get some more. I don't know whether they had any this time because we haven't been up there, but Mike Gowdy's son's partner
is making that's right, making the earrings. All right, ladies, I know that you've got a special morning tea or lunch to get to, but I thank you very much for making the time for me today. It's been beautiful. Hello listeners, we're at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Service today, and I've been lucky enough to jag the person who was the MC. His name's Dan O'Mara. He's got a very extensive history, military history himself, and he's for the last couple of years been the MC for this event. Welcome along to Big Little Small Talk, Dan.
Oh, thanks, Megan. Good to be here. This is actually the first Vietnam Veterans Day service I've done, and it was, pleasure to be the MC.
Well, you make a liar of me. What were you MCing the last time I saw you at the Bowls Hall?
Last time we caught up, that was the Remembrance Day service on the 11th of November last year, yeah. And then I think before that, my dad taught your kids at Downlands and other friends and connections. It's a small place, Toowoomba.
It is a small place, and we're going to talk in a little bit about you coming back home and how you feel about that. But tell me about the Battle of Long Tan and what it means to you and perhaps your family or your friends or your career in the military.
Sure. Well, I'm an Afghanistan veteran. I served in the Australian Army from 1994 to 2017. I joined as a young soldier. Mum and Dad signed the dotted line for me. I was still 17. I was at St Mary's, then Christian Brothers College here in Toowoomba. And my whole reason for joining the Army was I wanted to keep my music up when I left school. I joined the local 25th Battalion, the Royal Queensland Regiment Band, as a clarinet player, and infantry battalion. We did our infantry stuff. It was a bit of embarrassment to the commanding officer the year that the band took out the battalion shooting trophy. But then I loved it so much. I'd earned a trade at McDonald Print Group and was accepted into the Australian Defence Force Academy, and then later graduated to the Royal Australian Corps of Signals after completing Duntroon at the Royal Military College, and served in SIGs for many years in different postings throughout Australia and in training roles overseas and capability development. But my probably highlight of that time was a recruit instructor at Kapooka at the Army Recruit Training Centre. I was fortunate enough a few years later to be picked up for some postgrad study with Army, and ended up court transferring into the Australian Army Public Relations Service, and that's where I finished my time. And I deployed to Afghanistan as a military public affairs officer, and particularly in the years since then, a lot of corporate communications work in Army's Forces Command. I was responsible for starting up the initial social media cell within the Department of Defence and writing the initial policy in my last years, and a lot of training and preparedness and incident management. So that's my career in a nutshell. But what does this day mean to me? Well, I'm an Afghan veteran. I've got a lot of family and friends. My uncle was is a Vietnam veteran. He was a vehicle mechanic at the Logistics Support Force at Vung Tau. Every Thursday morning, a bunch of us local veterans, they're mainly comprised of Vietnam veterans, we play volleyball at USQ, Clyde Berghofer. 8:30 Thursday for anyone, other veterans who are keen to come along. We welcome all veterans and families. What does this mean to me? I'm proud to be MC, and it's a privilege to be asked to do this, because I honour and support those mates and family who have served, in a lot more warlike operations in some sense than some of our recent conflicts. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot to take in for me in a very first sentence.
Sorry.
Tell me about the Battle of Long Tan.
Okay, so it was on the 18th of August in 1966. It was one of Australia's fiercest military battles, or fiercest battle of the Vietnam War. Involved Delta Company of the 6th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, in a rubber plantation outside the village of Long Tan in Phuoc Toi Province, I think it was, if memory serves me correct. It saw some of the fiercest fighting during not only the Vietnam War but in recent conflicts, probably since Korea. The 6th Battalion, Delta Company of the 6th Battalion, they suffered incredible losses, both wounded and those killed in that battle. You may well have spoken with Lindsay Morrison, who is one of our Vietnam veterans at the Toowoombarra Cell sub-branch. He was a medic during that battle, and his stories are just incredible of the scenes that confronted him in that day and then the days that followed as well. The battle on the 18th of August 1966 became known as Long Tan Day, as it was commemorated for years since, and given its significance within the Vietnam War and Australian sort of conflicts, it's become now known as Vietnam Veterans Day, and that's why we celebrate this day on the 18th of August every year.
It's a beautiful day to do it too. Talk to me about your experience being an Afghanistan veteran, as opposed to what you know and believe the Vietnam veterans experienced when they came home from conflict.
Yeah, I guess for some of us, I don't know, not all of us. It's such an individual experience that we've each had. It depends on the circumstances. I mean, I was based in Kabul. I travelled all over the country. I was keen and eager to go. It was my first and only deployment. You always hold comparisons to those that have come before you, and I think for many of us we feel some sort of guilt, survivor guilt. It's known as a psychological term about getting through it. But I've always felt my experience has sort of paled in comparisons to some of my other contemporary veterans and those veterans of Korea, and my grandfather fought in Milne Bay. And his brother was killed in Borneo. So it's a bit sobering for me when I reflect sometimes on my own service compared to but then again, different times, different operations. Yeah.
I suppose, Dan, what I was sort of getting at there was the lessons that we learnt and the way the Vietnam vets were treated, I guess, when they came back to Australia.
Oh yeah, sure. Look, it was disgusting the way they were treated. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. Guys being spat on, told that they were baby killers or rapists. I mean, one of my mates I play volleyball with, his father, who was a proud member of the local RSL, brought him back from Vietnam in his uniform, and both his father and he were kicked out of the actual RSL at the time because he's told he didn't fight in a real war and get out, and he's really suffered. It's awful enough what they've been through, but then to have that when they came home. So, and I know from my own personal experience, it's been a year since Kabul fell back to the Taliban, and the first people that reached out to me and a lot of my Afghan veteran mates were our Vietnam vets mates that we share that kinship with, because they knew exactly how we felt when Saigon fell as well, and the comparisons were quite sobering. But it's been good now that those lessons of the past have been somewhat learned. I think it's important that we honour them, any sacrifice and respect service and commitment to our country. Yeah.
Well, I think it was only yesterday or the day before was the 12-month anniversary of coming out of Kabul, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, yeah. And that was a very difficult time for me and a lot of other veterans to see that a lot of that stuff we'd worked for and fought for, the people of Afghanistan, just to sort of fall back into the very hands of those we were trying to defend the rest of their country against. Yeah.
And who will ever forget those harrowing images of people hanging onto the sides of the plane as those planes were leaving?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Do you have any friends still in Afghanistan?
I have, well...
or work colleagues that you...
Yeah, well, I have a couple of people I know who are doing sort of private security and contractor work. Whether they're still there at the moment, I don't actually know. Yeah.
And what do you believe has happened to, well, particularly things that I was listening to and I suppose I'm interested in, is what's happened to the women and the girls in terms of their educational prospects in Afghanistan?
Yeah, well, I can only speak on what I've seen in the news recently. I don't really have anyone on the ground with first-hand experience other than what I get through the media, but I did see something recently about a secret girls' school that one of the ladies is sort of running at quite risk and peril to her own safety and those of the girls around us, that she's doing sort of, secretly within the bounds of their own home. But,
Can I take you back to your parents signing on the dotted line? Tell me what happened there.
It was something I wanted to do. I'd been speaking about for a while. My local music teacher at school, Dennis, was the local bandmaster. I had a couple of mates who were joining, and it was just something that I thought was fun, and I wanted to keep, that sort of, I've had a very unorthodox military career. I never expected or nor intended it to last 22 years. It was just something fun that, I just enjoyed and loved doing. Yeah. It wasn't easy all the time, but yeah.
So you went from being a clarinet player. Do you still play the clarinet?
Very poorly. I haven't kept up as much as practice as I should have over the years. I tend to pick it up if I've been in a melancholy mood. A few people would have been encouraging me to get back involved in it again, but my skills are a bit rusty.
Well, of all the reasons why I've heard someone go off to join the army, to keep playing the clarinet, I think is an absolute first for me. We talk about playing music, and you talked about playing the volleyball. Tell me about the importance of sort of that fellowship, or the exercise, I guess, really, for your mental health.
Yeah, well, courage, initiative, teamwork and respect are the full values of the Australian Army, and I think for me the biggest one is that mateship and teamwork. Through sport, there's a really different congenial sort of vibe to, say, attending a commemorative event like this. A lot of the Vietnam vets that play volleyball with us, and some other veterans, they aren't keen on being involved in activities like this or formal commemorative services. That's why it's important, like through sport and adventure training, that's why it's important for those sort of activities to sort of keep going. And it develops a different a kind of mateship and teamwork and so support and fellowship in that sense, because it's not in a formal setting. And I mean, even beyond the volleyball court, into programs like the Young Veterans and the Toowoomba RSL is doing now. I mean, I felt like a lot of veterans do when we get out. I mean, depending on how they exit their service, you feel very isolated, and when your identity is wrapped up in Army or military or the Australian Defence Force, it's hard to sort of find your way. But I found real comfort and support and teamwork and mateship through joining the RSL, and that's only been in the last couple of years that I felt comfortable to do that.
Did you think that it was sort of an old man's thing? The RSL is not you.
Exactly. I mean, I grew up in Toowoomba. There has been a bit of an old boys club, and the image of the RSL is sort of eating schnitties around a dusty old hall, polishing off $2 pots and poker
What's
machines.
the wet dish for today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, but for me, I've been really impressed with the local RSL, because our president is young, our vice president is young, and they're all about activities for everyone, not just the young people. I mean, we've got a race car. We race in a budget motor sports endurance team. It's a bright yellow 89 Ford Laser called the Flying Pineapple. I'm not a rev head, but I've had so much fun flogging it around the race course, and we're going to do it again in a couple of weeks' time. But it's activities like that bring people together based on each different needs, and having an environment with which to do that and throw up ideas and have a go or try something different. It's really different than the cultural norm of what people perceive as a tired old boys club in some senses. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 40dB, and there's with me, Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, in Big Little Small Talk, and we're talking with the MC from the Vietnam Veterans Service today, Dan O'Mara. Dan, you said that you grew up in Toowoomba, you went to St Mary's, you've been away for a long time. What prompted the homecoming?
It was a bit of a must for me. I got a medical discharge from Army, and it was really important for me. I was living in Canberra at the time and working at Defence Headquarters, and it was really important for me to come home and to be around a supportive community, just for my own mental health and well-being. I recognised that, and it's quite odd, because when I came back from Afghanistan, I bought my nan's place with the money I was able to save up from that, and she needed to go into care. Nan was in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force during the war. Pop, as I said, was a Millen Bay veteran, and Mum's an only child, and it's the house she grew up in, so it was important for me to honour that sort of family history and connection. I'm named after Pop, and being the number one grandson, having a lot of time at Nan's house through the years was important, and I just didn't want to see that sort of piece of history lost. It's the home I'm now living in. It's my happy place, and I've become addicted to gardening. I'm really embracing retirement. I'm fortunate enough to draw a decent a pension from Army. I've had a couple of years study at TAFE doing a horticulture course. Whether that goes into landscape design or something, I don't know. But I never ever saw myself living back here in Toowoomba, but it's amazing how things change when you're older, wiser, and you've been around the block, and you realise that oftentimes it's the simple things in life that are the best and the most important. So being back around a supportive community of family and friends and old school mates has been good, and it's done wonders for my mental health. And then also finding collaboration in the RSL and the young veterans here as well.
You talked about doing the social media and the communications within the military. Do you do much of that sort of thing at all anymore?
No. When I first got out, I thought, oh, geez, I need to keep doing this. And I was doing a Masters of Corporate Comms out at USQ. And then I took a break and I thought, why am I doing this? It's a stressful role, when you're involved in high-level corporate comms and strategic issues management. I mean, I don't miss those days of writing speeches for generals or front page news, or keeping stuff out of the papers. So I took a break and I thought, why am I doing this? And I thought, well, there's no real reason to be doing that other than sort of chasing some sort of prestige or status. And I thought, well, what makes me happy? I'm loving gardening and just working on the house and doing renovations of what I can afford. So, yeah.
And you could live in a worse place than Toowoomba with its beautiful volcanic soil to get a love for gardening later in life. I shouldn't say later in life.
Well, you can plant a stick and it'll grow into a tree, as they say here, with a good red soil. I'm the last person I expected to have swapped a green uniform for a green thumb. So, yeah.
Oh, that is a tagline if I ever heard one, a green uniform for a green thumb. Now, we're running out of time, unfortunately, Dan, and I haven't given you any preparation for these questions. But if you could tell me what about if you just had one type of food group that you could carry in your pocket, what would it be?
I think a packet of Allen's Party Mix lollies. I love them.
Which is your favourite, the pineapples?
No, the strawberries and cream, definitely.
Another question I always like to ask my guests, and as I said, you haven't had any preparation, so I apologise for that. Who's your favourite royal? Now, it doesn't have to be a British person, and they don't have to be living, but as someone who's quite obsessed with, I guess I'd say probably the celebrity of the royals, that's me. You? Who's your favourite royal?
I'd have to be Prince Philip. I have a book at home called The Wisdom of Prince Philip, and it's a collection of his most irreverent comments, and it's absolutely brilliant. I watched a Netflix doco recently on his mother and the sacrifice she made during, the Greek Civil War and her history. And I think for someone who's come from that background and history and just doesn't give a damn. He's very self-aware and a real cheeky sense of humour. But when you said royal, the first thing that came to my mind, there used to be a show called The Royal Family, Royale, and it's sort of British bogan equivalents, and there's the Jim Royal, who's the patriarch of the family, and he used to remind me a bit of my father, sitting there on the couch and having a laugh and often quoting the same thing. So that's what first came to mind when you mentioned royals.
No, I won't have anyone speak ill of your father. I have to defend him to the end. Okay, my very last question for you. Are you a dancing man? You would be a dancing man, I can imagine, a singing man, having this, that musical history. What's the song, if I put it on, you can't stay off the dance floor for?
I'm not a dancer at all. I've got two left feet. No. But Shirley Bassey did do a version of I'm Coming Up, which is the Pink song that always used to get a rile out of me years ago. But look, I think for me, being an ex-army bandsman and in later life sort of foregoing, playing music to getting into the speaking word, in my later years in his work, doing military parades and army voiceovers, being known as the voice of army. But I think I used to do a rendition of The Man from Snowy River with the music from the motion picture, and the accompaniment to that is just really stirring. So for me, I think that's probably the other iconic piece of music. Not necessarily getting up a dance floor, but it just evokes a lot of that Australian high country and
Can you give me a verse of The Man from Snowy River?
Oh, well, there was movement at the station for the word had passed around. That's the start everyone knows, but I think the final verse is there. And down by Kosciuszko, where the bright stars fairly blaze at midnight across the cold and frosty sky, where round the overflow the reed beds sweep and sway to the breezes and the rolling plains are wide, the man from Snowy River is a household word today, and the stockmen tell the story of his ride. And that for me just brings goosebumps.
Well, that is the most beautiful Australian way to finish this very special Vietnam veterans and their contribution to the Vietnam War, or the American War, they call it in Vietnam, don't they, when you go there, down the Chu Chi tunnels. But we're going to say goodbye, listeners, with that beautiful rendition, the last verse of The Man from Snowy River, with my very special guest, Dan O'Mara. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for having me, Megan. Let's do it again soon. Cheers.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.